Okay, I think we're ready to begin. So thanks everyone for joining us, taking some time out of your day to attend this contractor orientation for the Low Income Weatherization Program. We'll go into more detail on the program in a few minutes. Just to summarize, the program is funded by the California Department of Community Services and Development and is intended to support owners and residents to lower costs, save energy, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in large multifamily projects. So today we're using GoToWebinar software, and we will actually take questions at the end of the webinar, but feel free to type them into the questions bar at any time, and we will take them in kind of the order received. Um, so we are recording this webinar. We'll also be sending out a slide deck, and any of the handouts that we referenced during the presentation we will send out to everyone after, all the registrants, along with the contact information for our panelists today. So speaking right now, this is Shannon with TRC Energy Services on behalf of the program, and I would like to hand it off to my colleague Sophia Hartkoff, also with TRC Energy Services, to begin the presentation, and then later on we'll hear from Nick Durr with the Association for Energy Affordability. One more thing to note is that we had slated this webinar for an hour and a half, and we're going to try to get through most of the content by the end of the hour, so wrap up by 1, but since we'll be taking questions at the end, we might roll over. So just take note of that. You're welcome to jump off, but you might miss some of those questions. So I think we're ready, and Sophia, I will hand it over to you to go over the agenda.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Again, this is Sophia Hartkoff with TRC Energy Services, and I'm excited to give you an overview today of the Low-Income Weatherization Program for large multifamily properties. And just to give you a high-level understanding of what we're going to be covering today, this is the contractor orientation. We require that any contractors that are participating in this program and installing upgrades that are receiving incentives through this program go through this webinar just to get an understanding of the program structure, how the process works, and what we expect of you specifically throughout the process in terms of your limited engagement with the program, acting as the contractor installing measures. So I'm going to go over the program itself, participation process, eligibility, types of measures we see installed, the incentive structure for energy efficiency as well as photovoltaics, and a few project examples specific to energy efficiency where I can give you a basic understanding of the types of scopes we're looking at for these large multifamily properties. And then in the second section of this presentation, we'll go over specific requirements as it relates to the contractor's participation in the program. We will be asking for certain documentation from you to be listed as a participating contractor, including license information and insurance. And we'll also go over some examples of how the program will get engaged with reviewing the performance specifications or the scope of work that's identified through this program and where the contractor specifically plays a role during this process, and briefly combustion safety as well. And following that, we'll provide some additional resources and give you an understanding of what the next step is to participate in the program and to bring interested projects into the program as well. And then, as Shannon mentioned, we'll end with a question and answer period. Please feel free to pose your questions throughout the presentation if there are things that are not clear when we go over the program process and the contractor's role. And also, depending on timing and everything else, if there are opportunities to unmute folks and have live question and answer, we will certainly consider that as well at the end. Okay, jumping right into the program itself. So as Shannon mentioned, this is a statewide program that's overseen by the California Community Services Department. It's a state agency that administers weatherization programs throughout the state for both single-family homes and multifamily. This program is for large multifamily buildings, and like the most recent weatherization programs, they are funded through the cap and trade structure in California. And so as a result, we're looking for measures that result in greenhouse gas reductions. And typically any type of upgrade that results in energy savings also has an equivalent greenhouse gas reduction to it as well. So it's a similar types of measures that you would see in utility programs or other state energy programs or regional energy network programs. This program uniquely offers both energy efficiency incentives as well as incentives for solar thermal and solar photovoltaics. And the energy efficiency incentives are structured based on the amount of greenhouse gas reduction potential, and the PV incentives are structured based on the size of the system. And we'll go over the details of both of these structures a little bit later in this presentation. So this program was funded very recently, and the program just started earlier this year in 2016. There's $24 million available to large multifamily properties throughout the state. And that covers both incentives for energy efficiency as well as solar installations. As I mentioned, the program is overseen by Community Services and Development. And the project team consists of Association for Energy Affordability. They're the lead program administrator for this large multifamily component of the weatherization program. And working together with California Housing Partnership Corporation, CHPC, TRC Energy Services, my firm, and Grid Alternatives, who is the solar consultant providing support on this program. And in terms of roles and responsibilities, before I go into the program, so the Association for Energy Affordability is the lead on administering this program, is also providing the bulk of the technical assistance and support. CHPC is helping with program intake and affordability verification for nonprofit property owners. My firm, TRC Energy Services, we're responsible for project intake for for-profit owners and are also supporting AEA in this process of bringing contractors on board and screening contractors for based on insurance and other requirements that I'll go over. A little bit more about the program structure. We are using a single point of contact for a property owner. So the intent of this is that we're helping you identify through a single point of contact multiple resources, both as it relates to this program and the incentives that are available through this program, as well as the technical support, but also helping you find other resources that you can leverage, such as tax credits, either both federal or state, or looking at other utility programs that are available. This program is intended to really work in cooperation with other programs, such as the utility programs or the regional energy networks, or for that matter, the federal or state tax credits. And as much as possible, we want to help connect you to as many resources to help really buy down the cost of doing these types of upgrades in your buildings. There's no upfront costs to the property owner to participate in this program, but however, we do ask that if we move forward with a project and we want to dive deeper and we're looking to actually do some installation work, that the owner be prepared to pay a good faith deposit of up to $2,000 to help cover a portion of the audit costs. This program provides an audit as part of the process, and that upfront $2,000 is something we will ask of you once we've gotten some understanding of your project, identified as a good candidate for the program, and also identified some preliminary scope of work that we would be considering through this program. This program does provide audit and technical assistance at no cost to the property owner or to the contractor. We're here to support you throughout this process and make your projects as energy efficient as possible, as well as really encourage the most greenhouse gas reduction. As I mentioned, leveraging of other sources is really encouraged. In fact, we really want to see that happen. The incentives through these programs do cover a fairly significant portion of the costs. However, it's not a it's not a complete cover. We're not directly installing measures through this program at no cost to the property owner. So really, we're looking to leverage multiple sources to make it a really good, viable financial package for the property owner. Other benefits, the program provides a free benchmarking account using WeGoWise software for 1 year through the program, and we are using this as an opportunity to understand how effective the upgrades have been after the construction is complete, but also to understand how energy is being used in these multifamily buildings today. So both looking back as well as looking forward. The incentives themselves through this program are paid after the installation of the measures. So the property owner needs to have access to upfront capital to pay for the installation work until the program incentives are paid. And it's up to you as the contractor and the owner to figure out the best payment process to compensate for you for your work and time. So a little bit more about the process of participation. So the first step, as I mentioned earlier, and this is where CHPC and my firm TRC comes in, is to help you through the intake process. We work directly with the property owner during this stage to understand what properties are within their portfolio, get a sense of how big they are, types of upgrades the owner is interested in, what existing conditions are currently in place, or types of current conditions that may benefit from an upgrade. For example, an antiquated water heating system, for example. We look at all those factors and we come up with some basic early recommendations of where the opportunities are for this program to come in and provide incentives. Once we've completed this intake process and verified affordability and sufficient energy savings potential, we pass the project on for free technical support. And this technical support process is intended to be early preliminary technical analysis to help provide the owner and possibly the contractor, depending on how engaged you are early in the process, with some preliminary energy savings, preliminary costs of the upgrades we'd be looking at, and help you identify various scenarios of upgrades. We want to, through this program, we're providing a lot of flexibility in terms of the types of upgrades we're looking at. So we'll want to compare and provide a number of examples of types of scopes that you could install through this program. After the technical support process is completed and the owner has agreed that this is something they want to pursue specifically, that's when we ask for that good faith deposit and come out to the site and do a more rigorous technical analysis where we'll be looking at exactly what the existing conditions are, doing a walkthrough of the site, viewing a sample of the interior units, and developing a more robust scope of work that we will then attach an incentive reservation to. So reserving financial incentives happens after the audit's completed and we've all agreed on the scope of work. And it's been refined and there are clear specifications in place. And at that time, we encourage the owner to go out and request bids from contractors. And it's at that time that we would provide them with the list of participating contractors, such as yourselves who are attending this webinar today. And also, if you have a specific relationship with an owner already, or an owner brings forward a new contractor company, we have an opportunity to onboard new contractors as they come through. So the owners are not required to select from a predetermined list. Rather, that list will be consistently updated to bring on new contractors as owners bring them forward or as contractors learn about the program. After the incentives are reserved, at that stage, the installation work starts. During the construction process, we remain in contact with the project team to understand how we're doing as far as the construction schedule is concerned, checking in on milestones, and also scheduling a 50% construction completion inspection that the program provides at no cost to the project or the project team, but it's just an opportunity for us to take a look at how things are going and verify that everything is being installed according to the specifications that were agreed upon. And then once the project is completed, 100% completed, at that time, we would schedule a second inspection to verify the remaining scope of work, the remaining 50%, and then we work with you as the contractor to gather documentation about the measures that are installed, invoices, that sort of thing, to understand what all was done at the property, at what specification, and at what cost. And at that time, we also, once all those documents have been reviewed, we're able to cut the incentive check, and the incentive goes directly to the property owner. Eligibility. So this is a really key point. This program, because it is state funded, because it's a directly funded through the cap and trade fund, there are some very specific requirements in terms of eligibility that you should be aware of if you're talking with your clients. And some of them are pretty unique to this program. The first one is that properties must be located within a disadvantaged community. And this is something that's been defined by the Environmental Protection Agency of California, or Cal EPA. And it's a map online that we will provide you access to so you can look at your properties, although we are also happy to help screen portfolios and see whether they fall within these regions. They tend to be concentrated very heavily in the Central Valley, and then there are pockets of regions in some of the more urban coastal areas with another heavy concentration in the Los Angeles region. Secondly, the program requires this program for large multifamily properties. So we require at least 20 units of the property. If you have scattered campus buildings with small multifamily buildings of maybe 4 to 8 units or possibly larger that are scattered in a larger site, we can look at those types of properties. However, we may need to ask for a specific waiver from the state, since this program was intended to be designed for buildings of 20 units or more. But as I mentioned, really we're looking for the property to at least have 20 units. So if you have a scattered property where there's multiple buildings, smaller buildings that make up at least 20 units, that's where you want to start. And then thirdly, and this one's another really important component that's very specific to this program requires, it is a program designed at or below 80% of the average median income. And that means that we are looking for a couple of different documents to verify this. We have a couple of options. One, if the property is regulated by a state or federal agency, such as HUD or the Tax Credit Allocation Committee, and there's a regulatory agreement already in place that restricts the property at a certain income level or range, that's an easy way for us to verify that the property complies. We have a couple of other options to review affordability eligibility. We can also review the current rents at the property and verify whether they are at or below what would be considered the rent affordability standard of that region based on average incomes of a county, for example. And we can also look at some other, if you have tenants that are under care or are receiving some other form of utility reduction through the program, we can look at specifically at tenant incomes or other documentation that really sets the affordability for the property. And we can get into very detailed explanation with the property owners specific to their needs. The intent is that we're at least demonstrating that this property is inhabits at least 2/3 of their tenants are considered affordable. They're at or below 80% average median income for the region. And then also a few other key points here. The program is designed to push deeper scopes. So just doing lighting and appliances alone, for example, will likely not suffice to receive incentives through this program. We're looking at least 15% energy savings above existing conditions using energy modeling software. And we're using Energy Pro software to determine this percent improvement. So typically you're looking at least one major system replacement, such as water heating or heating and cooling system, and in addition to some of the lower cost, quick return type measures like lighting and appliances. And the program, we want to be providing this service and these incentives to a wide variety of property owners in a wide variety of regions. So at this time, we're restricting the participation to a maximum of 5 projects or 500 units per property owner. If you are working with an owner that has a very large portfolio and is very, very engaged and wants to do more than 500 units, please bring that forward to us, and we will place them on a wait list and get back to you if there's additional funding that we can take on more than 500 units. So I mentioned this disadvantaged communities map. You'll notice on this slide there's a link to the map itself. And as Shannon mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will provide a copy of this presentation upon completion of this webinar. And as I mentioned, you can see where the heavy concentrations of disadvantaged communities are. All the areas in red are considered disadvantaged. It tends to be very heavily concentrated in the Central Valley, in San Bernardino type area, as well as heavy concentrations in Los Angeles and some concentrations south of Los Angeles. Contractor selection. So the program itself, we're not involved in the process of bringing on contractors. We are developing a repository of participating contractors. We're verifying that you're appropriately licensed and insured to do the work. However, it's ultimately up to you to bring projects to compete or bid on projects and win work. This program certainly is providing a mechanism to help you expand your business, but we're not directly farm work to you or to a participating contractor list. It's the owner and the owner exclusively that makes the decision to hire a contractor or multiple contractors to perform the installation work. We will provide a list of participating contractors, which we will provide to owners when they request it, or the owners can bring forward their own contractors, as I mentioned. We also will provide assistance to the owners on developing bidding documents and soliciting bids from contractors. And in terms of the solar installation work, the program can provide through our team member Grid Alternatives the actual installation of solar, or the owner can choose to select a solar provider that they already have an existing relationship with, or ones that they have considered hiring in the past to install solar. So we can provide the installation work through this program, or the owner can select their own contractor. And similarly to the efficiency component, where AEA and the program team is providing technical assistance to projects on the efficiency side, Grid Alternatives can provide technical assistance specific to solar if you haven't quite figured out the exact design you want to pursue or where you want to put the solar panels on the property. So types of measures that we're looking at through this program. It encompasses really many different facets of the building. And similar to many other weatherization programs, there are a lot of opportunities in the building shell as a starting point. We can look at insulation in the roof, the wall, the attic, possibly also insulation under the roof if you're considering a roof replacement. We also can look at cool roof coatings or cool roof tiles. And then in addition, we can look at window replacements or window coating and shading devices to reduce interior heat gain. Through this program, we cannot claim credit for air sealing measures, but that doesn't mean that as a contractor, if you're performing work, that it's not a good service to the property owner to do air sealing. It's just very difficult to test for air sealing or air change reductions in multifamily buildings, especially larger ones. So we're not offering that as an option at this time through the program. We also, another area we'd be looking at is heating and cooling systems, and it can be as big as an actual replacement of an existing system with a new unit or a new central system, or there are opportunities as well to seal and test the ducts, to add controls to the HVAC system, or possibly even consider adding an energy management system if it's a larger building that has a complicated operation or a more complicated operation. We can also replace pumps and fans depending on the type of system that's already installed. So it may not need to be a full system replacement, but rather some optimization of the current system. Third area we look at is water heating. Most obvious is in replacing the actual water heating system or boiler itself. but we can also look at controls such as variable speed pumps, recirculation controls, and we also look at if there's a pool in the property, there's a lot of opportunities to look at the pumps and equipment that are used to run and heat those pools or hot tubs, for example. And then a low cost and very, very economical improvement is low flow fixtures kitchen and in the kitchen and bath, such as faucet aerators, low flow shower heads. And lastly, pipe insulation is another area of opportunity. This program does not provide direct incentives for water efficiency in the traditional sense. However, we do look to hook up properties with their local jurisdiction or local water districts. So if there are opportunities to reduce landscape irrigation or install high-efficiency toilets, that sort of thing, we certainly will help you get engaged with appropriate incentives for that work. And then lighting and appliances, we look at lighting in all areas of the building and exterior, inside the units, inside the common areas, in outdoor lighting, parking lot lighting, or garage, just any kind of lighting that is associated with the property itself, we would be looking at as opportunities for improvement. And then traditional appliance change-outs such as refrigerators and dishwashers in unit or in common areas. And clothes washers and dryers also either in unit or in common areas. We also have an opportunity to influence the leasing structure of common area coin-operated laundry systems. So if you're able to convince the owner to install a more efficient front-loading washing machine, for example, and they sign up for a new lease with their leasing provider of those systems, we can incorporate that into the incentive for this program. And then lastly, renewable energy such as solar hot water and solar PV. Incentives, how does this work in terms of incentives? The program incentives are based on the amount of greenhouse gas savings. And we're the current incentive structure, for those of you who have been engaged with this program or have been watching previous program orientation webinars designed specifically to the property owner, for example, you may have heard that the program previously was providing incentives that were based on cost effectiveness of the package and based on the savings to investment ratio, or SIR. As of last week, very recently, we have changed the incentive structure to make it more transparent and easy to communicate, as well as to speed up the process of defining the incentive amount for projects. So the current incentive is very similar to what you would see for an incentive through a utility program. It's just the metric is different. So utility programs often pay $1 per unit or $1 per kWh or $1 per therm. In this case, we're paying $1 per greenhouse gas I shouldn't use that, I'll just keep out the terms, but greenhouse gas reduction, we base that off of the savings of the project. So we convert kWh and therm savings into this greenhouse gas metric and provide up to $5,000 per megaton of greenhouse gas reduction or $4,000 per megaton of greenhouse gas reduction. And that's based on whether the upgrades are being done inside the units, inside the tenant spaces, or in the common area. And also, we also look at whether the owner pays the bill or the tenant pays the bill. So depending on, and these are all things that during this technical assistance process that we provide at no cost to the property owner or to you as a contractor, we will help you understand your incentive before you're committed to providing the good faith deposit or committing to going through the full program process. All of that will become more clear to you through this process. And this program is, the current funding cycle ends at the after the first quarter of next year. So we're looking for projects that can complete construction by the end of the first quarter of 2017, which is next year. And if you have projects that you know quite well, there's just no way they're going to be completing construction by the end of first quarter of next year because they're going through tax credit resyndication or other processes. There is limited funding available after in a subsequent round of funding for projects that complete after the 1st of May of 2017. And that funding is limited. It's a small portion of the total incentive budget, and all of these incentives, as with any traditional program you're just going through in terms of utilities or the regional energy networks or any other state-funded. So get in and get involved with us quickly is the message I always try to encourage that you should communicate with your clients, your property owner. So a couple of examples of the types of scopes we've seen so far, and these are two real project examples that have come through the program. So this is an example project that's only accessing the Low-Income Weatherization Program, or LIWIP. They're not leveraging the Energy Upgrade California program or any of the other programs that are provided through the utilities or the regional energy networks. And so they're just receiving incentives through this program. And here they're installing the low-flow shower heads and aerators. They're doing a common area LED lighting upgrade, upgrading their washing machines in their common areas, and replacing a central DHW, or domestic hot water boiler. And the total estimated cost is approximately $100,000, and the program is providing roughly 65% of that total cost. And the owner is contributing the remaining either from their reserves, or they're going through and finding other financing opportunities to pay for that remaining $35,000 differential. And you'll notice that based on the savings, so you'll notice, for example, that the LED upgrade has a significant amount of kWh savings on the electric side, whereas on the gas side, our heaviest hitting measures are the water heating system and the shower heads and aerators that reduce water heating consumption. And those numbers get converted into the greenhouse gas metric and ultimately influence that X dollars per greenhouse gas reduction. Another example, this is a project that is leveraging the Energy Upgrade California program offered by many of the utilities in California, as well as the regional energy networks. And this particular project is going quite a bit deeper in terms of scope. You'll notice the previous project was at a roughly 17% energy savings above existing conditions. This project is at above 30%, so it's a much deeper scope. And in this case, they're replacing windows, and they're doing lighting in both the interior units as well as the site lighting on the exterior of the property. They're replacing water heaters in each unit, tankless water heaters with a 0.92 efficiency factor. And they're replacing current package HVAC units with high efficiency mini split heat pumps. So that's a pretty big investment there. You'll notice the cost is pretty significant. However, it also contributes a fairly significant portion of the total kWh energy savings. And in this example, the LIWIP incentive is roughly $200,000, or as you can see, 206 or 207 if you round up. And UC is contributing roughly $70,000 to the mix. So this project is a little over 50 or roughly 50% funded through both LIWIP, the Low Income Weatherization Program, and Leverage Energy Upgrade California sources, and the owner is paying the differential. And I want to mention one thing here that I haven't spoken about. So if you are leveraging other sources from utilities or other financing sources, we do ask that you demonstrate a deeper energy savings commitment. So the program requires a minimum 15%. As soon as you bring in other sources, we ask that you ratchet up to 25% energy savings, so a deeper scope. There are instances where if it's a newer building or it's recently been renovated and there's just not that many new savings opportunities in place, where we can waive that requirement. However, if we can find enough opportunity that makes sense for the property, the threshold for savings goes up to 25%. And the program requires that you at least do 15% before you access the solar PV incentive. So efficiency should always come first. And that leads me into the PV system incentives. So the program provides separate incentives for PV. So that what I've been talking about up until this point, this is all having to do with energy efficiency scope, and those are the measures that I went over in detail on the measure table. For PV systems, as I mentioned, energy efficiency must come first. We require at least 15% energy savings on the efficiency side before you install solar panels. But as I also mentioned, there is an opportunity to waive it if there's just not enough savings opportunity. So we'll work with you to identify the opportunity and determine whether a waiver is needed. And the PV incentive is based on the types of funding sources that you're leveraging to pay for the system, such as the low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, the federal income tax credits, or ITC, and the MASH program, which is an affordable solar housing program for multifamily administered by the investor-owned utilities in California. And the more you're leveraging funds, the lower the incentive is through LIHTC. So the program is not intending to overpay for solar. So we're trying to come up with a way to encourage you to do solar without going above and beyond the total cost of installing solar based on the sources that you're leveraging. And the incentive is also dependent on whether you're leveraging, whether you're offsetting an owner meter or individual tenant meters. And the incentives are much richer on the tenant side than they are on the common area or owner meter side. And the actual quantity of incentive through the program is dependent on the size of the system. And I'll discuss in a moment here exactly what those dollars per watt are. So you'll notice here that the incentive itself varies based on what sources you're leveraging, whether it's going affecting the owner meter or the tenant meter, and well, those are the two primary ones. So you'll see here that for a project that's leveraging the federal tax credit and the low-income tax credit, your dollars per watt is 50 cents for owner meter systems and $1.50 for tenant systems. And it varies based on how much you're leveraging. The richest incentives come from, of course, from projects that are leveraging no programs. And in between, you can find different scenarios of projects that are leveraging just one or maybe two instead of, well, I guess in instances I should mention, if you're leveraging all three, the federal investment tax credit, the low income tax credit, and MASH, it's assumed that those three sources are covering your costs. But if you're finding that there's a gap, there's still a cost gap, and you're not able to make solar pencil on a project despite leveraging multiple sources, get in touch with us and we can help you. There may be opportunities for the low income weatherization program to contribute into the equation. All right, a little bit more information about the solar PV incentive structure. As I mentioned, if your project doesn't fit within the table on the previous slide, get in touch with us because we want to help you through this process and identify opportunities to install solar. For size systems that are over 100 kW, which all of the incentives on the previous slide were based on 100 kW, the incentives will step down, so the dollars per watt will reduce, and this is assuming there's an improved economies of scale with larger systems like that, and the total cost is not necessarily linear. And the other thing that we're looking at for on the PV side is how optimal or optimized your system is. And we use a tool that's offered through NREL, PV Watts, to define what the solar design factor of a project is or of an installation is. If it's greater than 90%, we will fund the full dollars per watt, as we mentioned on the previous slide. If it's less than 90%, the incentive will be reduced accordingly. So if it's 86%, we'll pay 86% of the total incentive. If it's 40%, we'll pay 40% of the total incentive. So we really want to encourage you to optimally design these systems so that they're going to operate the most efficiently. And that tool looks at things like where are you orienting your solar, how much sun exposure does it get. So really making sure that the system is being put in the optimal place on the building, and considering how effective it's going to be at producing energy ultimately. Types of financing. So in many cases, property owners may have chosen to work through a PPA or a power purchase agreement. And that is totally appropriate. We can still provide incentives for projects that are going through a PPA. Or, of course, we can help contribute towards the total cost if an owner is deciding to purchase the system themselves. But we do ask that the owner enter into a 5-year operations and maintenance contract for both photovoltaics and thermal if they are owned by the property owner rather than through a power purchase agreement. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick time check. We're already 40 minutes in, so I'm going to try to get through these next pieces, which is probably what you're most concerned about hearing about, which is specific to contractor participation in the program and how that works. First step is the orientation today. We ask that every participating contractor send at least one of the requirements. We also ask that you satisfy the program license and insurance requirements, which I will go over, and you document these requirements these requirements to us. We ask that you commit to maintaining regular contact with us and attend additional trainings as needed. We may put together some additional training opportunities as it relates to specific types of measures, for example, where we'll go over best practices and also specifics as it relates to the efficiency and the specification of each of those measures. And then, as I mentioned, it's your responsibility to maintain a contractual relationship with the property owner. We have no part in that contract. We're just here to help provide incentives and technical support. For license requirements, really in essence here, we're asking that you provide documentation that you are appropriately licensed for the work that you're doing at the site. So if you're doing work on insulation, or you're doing work on HVAC, demonstrate your licensees, either general or specialty, that show us that you're appropriately licensed to do that work, and we will keep track of your various licensees. So send us what you have, and we will keep track of those licensees and request additional documentation as needed. In terms of insurance, we ask that you carry basic insurance for the work that you're doing. We're looking specifically at general liability, automobile liability for both business and personal vehicles. And then if you are not a sole proprietor, we also ask that you provide workers' compensation. Insurance. And really, we're just asking for the documents insurance at the appropriate levels, and we will, as soon as we have this documentation, we will list you on the contractor list. In addition, we ask that you use discretion when you're promoting this program. So this program, we have a program website, which I'll provide you a link to. We also have a flyer with approved language in terms of how the program process and the intent of the program, things like that. If you are doing specific promotional materials with your logo on it, please send those over to us so that we can take a look. In general, we do not want you to commingle your logo with the state's logo. So if you're doing promotional work, you're welcome to reference the website and reference key language from the program fact sheet, but please use discretion. We can't have you acting on behalf of the program directly, so that's something you need to think about as you're creating promotional materials. And when in doubt, share it with us. We're happy to help support you in this process. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Nick Durr with the Association for Energy Affordability to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the contractor role in this process. Nick?
And Sophia, I'm just going to chime in really quick. Your audio's been a little bit spotty during the presentation. If it's easy for you to switch over to like a cell phone while Nick's talking, you might want to try that.
Okay, I can do that.
Hi folks, this is Nick Durr from AEA, and I'm going to be discussing some of the technical components that we're going to be working with you all on the projects that you're going to be participating with. At a really high level, the role that you're going to play on these projects and the role that we're going to play in assisting is AEA is going to be providing some minimum performance requirements for the various measures that are installed in the program. For a lot of your traditional measures that are sort of the same throughout the whatever property you're working on, so shower heads or aerators, maybe lighting. That sort of stuff, we're going to have sort of a program standard minimum performance requirements that we'll provide to you if those measures are included on the project. And then for projects that have more specialized systems, so maybe central domestic hot water or central HVAC and those sorts of things, we'll probably have, or we will have project-specific performance requirements. So that's going to detail both what the efficiency requirements are for the various materials, but also what the installation requirements will be that we're going to be looking at. And essentially what we're hoping to do here is to recognize and reward contractors who do really good work, who take a lot of pride in their job, who are focused on going above and beyond, doing best practice. And ultimately, we're all responsible for reporting up to the state that these projects will be achieving energy savings and greenhouse gas reductions. So essentially, we want to see that the stuff that's installed has the capability to do that. So on the projects that where you're the selected contractor by the owner, we'll be following up with you to have you sign those minimum requirements for that specific project. Those minimum requirements will also be available when you provide proposals to the owner so that you know exactly what it is that you're providing a bid on. Once you've been selected by the owner as the contractor for that project, we'll be asking that you provide submittals for the various measures that you're going to install, so that way we can pre-approve before you actually go out and install it, and that way you know you're program compliant with those materials. Projects obviously need to meet applicable permitting requirements as required by the local jurisdiction. Properly dispose of equipment when required. That's primarily going to apply to your lighting jobs and maybe refrigerators. Just making sure that you have the appropriate documentation to show that that stuff is properly recycled or disposed. We will be asking for a construction schedule, and as part of the incentivations with the owner, they're going to be providing some agreed upon milestones that the project's going to achieve. So the owner is going to be identifying when they're going to have the contractor selected, when we will start to receive equipment submittals, when construction will start, when construction will be 50% complete, and when construction will be fully complete. And that way we can ensure that the project is staying on track. And if it's starting to diverge a little bit and go off track, we can try to jump in and make sure everything's going to still get finished on time. And then that way the owner can get the full incentive, and then hopefully you guys will get the payment that you were expecting at the end of the project. We are providing cost estimates to owners when they request it so that they can help identify which measures they want to pursue. And so we're going to be using sort of industry best practice, previous projects that we've been involved in as basis for cost estimates, manufacturers, price lists, maybe RS means in some instances, but we're going to have general high-level estimates that we're providing the owners so they can get a rough idea of what construction costs are going to be. If we do find that bids are coming back with costs that are substantially higher than what we estimated, there may be a very good reason for why that's the case, and it's just something that we missed or underestimated, and that's fine. We would just ask that the contractor provide some justification for why those costs are coming back so high. Next slide, please. So we're actually going to grab two examples of what you would potentially see on some projects in regards to minimum performance requirements, one for a central condensing domestic hot water system and then the other for an attic insulation job. So the first one here, what you see is an example document for a central domestic hot water boiler. So what we'd be stipulating is what the equipment requirements are. So on this one, it's 2 condensing domestic hot water boilers with at least 95% efficiency as rated by AHRI. And also that it has a 5-to-1 turndown ratio. So that's the basic parameters of what the equipment requirements would be, and then you as the contractor have the ability to select whichever make and model of boiler you'd want to use as long as it meets those minimum requirements. And then from that point on, it's the installation requirements that we're going to be verifying during construction and at completion of construction. So obviously install it to the manufacturer's requirements, but then you start to look at stuff that maybe isn't, it might be optional when you look at the installation operation manual for that particular system. So In this example, we wanted to see a condensate neutralization kit for the condensing boiler, so that was called out. We're asking that there's some documentation provided to verify that the domestic hot water boiler that was selected is actually based on the anticipated load of the building, so they're not necessarily just replacing like for like. There's actually some logic that goes into it to decide, is this the right size boiler for this building? Then we're going on into other components that we're expecting to see, or installation details that we're expected to see. If you go down a little bit further, this is one we see a lot in the fields, is how the boiler is actually operating. So if it's a boiler that's providing hot water to a storage tank, we actually want to see the pumps that are on the boiler, the actual circulator itself, only turned on when there's a call for heat from the storage tank. So some operational best practices to ensure that the system is operating very efficiently. We have details on the storage tank, details on pipe insulation. So this is really Title 24 requirements anyway, that a new boiler has the pipe insulation thicknesses as required by Title 24, but more often than not, we either see insulation not present or insulation that is too thin. So these are the things that we're going to be calling out and expecting to see on these types of jobs. Go ahead and switch to the next page here. So here's an example of attic cavity. So historically, you may have just seen a requirement that says install R38 in the attic cavity. And that's essentially what you're going to see at a very high level. That's what the rebate's going to be based on. But there's actually much more to that R38 installation. So we actually want to make sure that the appropriate type of installation is being used. We want to make sure that there is some pre-inspection done at the building. And if there's going to be any issues, whether it's water leakage or knob and tube wiring or those sorts of things, that is being addressed prior to construction and essentially prior to the contractor actually providing the proposal to the building owner, so that we can ensure that those costs are included in that overall proposal. Can you go to the next page of the PDF? Air sealing. So again, we're not just saying insulate the attic with R38. We actually are expecting that someone actually air seals that attic cavity. So prior to the new installation going in, someone's going in and installing foam or caulking or sheet metal or whatnot, where there's any air bypasses, any air leaks. And for some of these projects where we've sort of identified that this is going to be an issue, we will be out there either at the pre-bid meeting and definitely at the pre-construction meeting to make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what needs to be addressed there. Distance from combustibles, attic baffles, all these things that you typically would see in code requirements, we're actually going to also be verifying is installed to make sure, again, that it's both safe and efficient. So these are just two examples, but we have similar documents really for all the various measures that we have in the program. And again, what we're really trying to encourage and recognize is contractors that have a lot of pride in their work and that they do good work, and that collectively we can all be comfortable and confident that we're delivering very high energy savings projects that are going to speak well to the program and allow it to continue down the road. So for those of you on the phone who really do great work, this will really give you an opportunity to be recognized and to participate in the future with additional owners. And really, we want to try to weed out projects and contractors who aren't used to doing best practice. Really what we want to do are have strong, successful projects overall. Next slide, please. So additional roles that collectively AEA will play in both assisting the owners as well as assisting you, the contractors. So especially for more complicated projects where the owner is requesting multiple bids, we can assist both the owner and the contractor with a pre-bid site walkthrough to make sure everybody's on the same page and that the proposals you're providing the owner are apples to apples to your colleagues in the industry. We will, on behalf of the owner, we can review those proposals to make sure that everything that the contractor is providing in that scope of work aligns with what our expectations were, and that way we can minimize any change orders or anything that's unexpected down the road, and really have a nice, clean, straightforward project, at least as the best possible. We'll provide you, the contractors, with the general specifications for commonly installed measures, as well as specialized specifications and performance requirements for more complex measures, again, so that you know what the expectations are from day one. We'll conduct pre-construction meetings for those complex measures, and then we'll be coming out on site during construction, typically around 50%, but it really could come out at any stage in construction to kind of make sure that we're all on track and on the same page. And then we'll come out again at the completion of the project to make sure that the measures were installed correctly. Once we come out and verify everything looks good, then we'll go ahead and release the incentives to the building owner. Workforce development. So the cap and trade program in general has an emphasis on workforce development. Right now, essentially, workforce development is achieved by making these projects happen and getting you guys on those jobs. But as the program matures and advances, we may have additional workforce development emphasis on either companies working within the disadvantaged communities or companies that hire employees from the disadvantaged communities. So, we may do things such as if you can provide documentation that these projects are causing you to hire staff, and you've done that. They live in a DAC, or we've found a way for you to work with a workforce development institution or educational institution to get more employees on board, then maybe that means you get recognition for doing that on the approved contractor list. Next slide, please. Combustion safety. So for those of you who are familiar with combustion safety, essentially what we need to do is rehab of the project. We haven't done anything that would cause a gas appliance to operate unsafely. That's primarily atmospheric appliances, so wall furnaces, or maybe a ducted furnace that's still an older atmospherically vented appliance, as well as in-unit water heaters. So we're going to be going out there to make sure that the equipment's venting properly, that there's no gas leaks, that it has compliant gas lines, and that sort of thing. So we'll be working with the owner as well as the contractor just to make sure that we're all on the same page there. And then at the completion of the project, in addition to verifying the installation measures, we'll be doing some combustion safety testing to make sure that everything's safe. And if there's any issues that are identified either prior to construction or post-construction, we'll need to make sure that the owner addresses those before we can issue the incentives. So the next steps is, I'll just take this part, Sophia. So next steps is submit the insurance documents and license documents that Sophia listed earlier to contractors at liwip-lmf.org. And that way we can start to review those and get you onto the system as an approved contractor. As part of that process, we're also going to ask that you provide your primary contact information, so your name, phone, email, as well as the geographic regions that you serve. And we have some broad categories that cover a lot of the regions. And the reason we need that information is so when an owner reaches out and they say, do you have some GCs or some plumbing contractors, electrical contractors that are participating in the program that we could use to get proposals, we know right off the bat, whether you would be able to serve just Southern California properties or just Central Valley properties, or if you're actually able to serve any property in the state, and then we would get you guys connected accordingly. So how buildings themselves participate in the LIWIP program. Primarily the conversation is with the owners and AEA, CHPC, and TRC. So what we need you to do as contractors is, if you have owners and properties that you're working with, have the owners reach out to these two email addresses listed on the screen, and then we'll get them in the program pipeline accordingly. So we have a nonprofit route. So if that ownership entity is a nonprofit organization, then have them email nonprofit@liwip-lmf.org, and that's going to have them go with CHPC, who's going to focus on the nonprofit properties. If your owner is a for-profit entity, they just email that email address there, and that's going to go through TRC. And they're basically going to do the intake qualifications, so make sure it's in a disadvantaged community, make sure that it's a low-income property, and then make sure that it really is a good candidate for the program overall, so that there is energy savings opportunities and that the project and the property has the resources and interest and ability to undertake a comprehensive scope of work. And then once CHPC or TRC sort of complete that initial screening process, then they'll get transitioned over to AEA, and we'll do some desktop analysis to identify generally what the opportunities could be, what the incentives could be, what the percent savings could be. We'll follow up with the owner on those opportunities, and if everything looks good, then we'll sort of officially escalate the project, go out and do the full site visit, and put together a potential scope of work with the building owner. And depending on what your relationship is with the building owner, you know, the building owner is come to bring you in that process as part of those preliminary discussions. But again, primarily our dialogue is going to be with the building owners in that perspective, and then the building owners are going to be the ones that hire you, the contractors, to do the work. So a couple resources, the program website's there. We'll also have this presentation on that website, as well as an FAQ to handle some of the more detailed questions. So everything you need there is on that website, and we also have an interest form on that website. So if the building owner, when they're ready to participate, just give them that website. On the bottom right there is an interest form. So if they want, they could fill out the interest form there. Or essentially that interest form, you can only do one building at a time. So typically what we recommend is if the building owner has a lot of properties that could be eligible for the program, they should just email those email addresses we listed earlier. And then TRC or CHPC can work with them actually to identify which buildings in their portfolio would be eligible, rather than having them fill out, you know, 5 or 10 different interest forms. So with that, we'll open it up for questions, and then going forward, if you guys have any specific questions about the program, you have your own specialized email address that you can use to reach out to us. So that's the contractors at liwep-lmf.org. But I think now we can open it up and answer any questions that folks have on the phone.
Great, thanks, Nick. So I actually don't see any typed in questions, but I think it would be good to give folks a couple minutes to think through if they're unsure about anything. So if you have any questions now, on your the sidebar of your GoToWebinar application, one of the options is questions. So you can just kind of expand that window and then type in some questions there. And we'll probably take most questions that way, kind of read them off. But we could also open up the audio channels if we think that would be helpful. Okay.
Shannon, this is Sophia. I have a question that I'll ask in the meantime. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So Nick, can you talk a little bit more about how we will make the performance specifications available to contractors? Is the intent that there'll be like a library they can access, or will we send out specific performance specifications during the bidding stage, depending on the project?
To start with, it'll be the latter. So based on the scope of work that we discussed with the building owner, you know, if they, whatever those details are as part of that reservation process, we'll be giving the building owner all those performance requirements so that they can ensure that the contractors that are bidding on that job or providing them proposals have all the information they need. And then basically, as we build that list, some of the more standardized ones we can probably have as an online reference for people to take a look at.
And are there any specific performance specifications we plan to have, like an efficiency minimum? For example, like, will we require a certain efficiency for lighting if they're replacing, you know, a standard, you know, lighting fixture?
Yep. Yeah. Depending on when we agree or set up a scope of work with the building owner, essentially because the incentives are based on the greenhouse gas reductions, built into those calculations is a general assumption of what efficiency, say, a water heater or a furnace will be, or what the SEER will be for an air conditioning unit, or what the wattage will be for the various lighting fixtures. So those general material requirements, efficiency requirements, we provided the owner. That way we can ensure that whatever's installed meets or exceeds that. If a material's efficiency was actually lower than what we estimated, then what would actually happen is that the owner's incentive would go down because the energy savings would go down accordingly.
Okay. Another question, and then I realized as I was going over the first part, I'm not sure if I accurately represented this information, has to do with the incentive and whether the owner has the right to release the incentive directly to the contractor. Is that an option we're providing through this program?
Good question. So a few things on the incentive payments. So the incentive payment is always going to go to the building owner, directly to the building owner in all instances. But how the owner and the contractor set up the transfer of those funds is up to them. So you know, if we write an incentive check to the building owner, they can immediately then transfer that over to the contractor. Really, it's entirely based on what the contract is between the building owner and the contractor. But on that note, you know, because we can only pay the incentives after the measures are completed and verified, you know, definitely some owners have expressed that that could present challenges to them because they may not have the upfront capital to actually pay for some of this work. They really are reliant on the incentives themselves to help subsidize the majority of the work. So we have a few options out there. We can phase projects, so we can pay incentives on measures as they're completed. You know, so we may, you know, working with the owner and then indirectly with the contractors, we may say, you know, everyone agrees to do the central mechanical equipment first and then do apartment measures second, and that way the owner can get the incentives for the central stuff first and then use that to help finance the second round of measures that are being installed at the property. So that pathway is there. There's definitely other owners, and this is sort of for the contractors out there who want to set up a creative business model really to help meet a need in this program, is express willingness to those owners that you're capable of structuring a contract such that you can wait to receive a lot of the payment after the work's actually completed and once the owner gets the incentives. So that's really up to you guys to set up that business model, but I can tell you that there's definitely owners out there that are interested in that sort of construct.
Great, thanks, Nick. And we actually have quite a few questions that rolled in while you guys were discussing those initial questions. So are you wrapped up? Would you like me to start posing those to you?
Sure.
Okay, great. So first, can you guys review what is the good faith deposit and what is the cost of that and kind of what is the purpose of it?
Sure. So so the good faith deposit amounts are based on the size of the building. So if the property is less than 50 units, the good faith deposit is $1,000. If it's between 51 units and 100 units, the good faith deposit is $1,500. And then if the building is larger than 100 units, the good faith deposit is $2,000. And then that good faith deposit is actually returned to the owner at the completion of the project. So in addition to all the incentives that they'd be getting, they would also get that good faith deposit back. And the reason that good faith deposit is there is because the fact that the energy audit and the technical assistance and all that stuff is covered by the program, that we need to make sure that the owner is serious about doing this property before we invest all of those resources. So, you know, as long as it's basically the owner having some skin in the game to say, look, I'm serious about doing this project. I agree that I'm going to go forward and follow through on all these steps. And that's really what that good faith deposit is meant to serve.
Great, thanks, Nick. So next does the program allow the owner to install some of the upgrades in-house rather than contracting out? I guess things that don't necessarily require any kind of license, like lighting changes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we have flexibility there for things like shower heads or aerators or light bulbs to work with the building's maintenance staff to do those directly.
Great. Okay. Next is, can you maybe just summarize quickly what it might help to go back to the timeline process slide, but just a recap of what the flow is in terms of, I think you guys addressed the screening process pretty well, but maybe Nick, if you can talk about your AEA's involvement with, once
Sure.
the project, we know it qualifies, what is the pre-bid process and any kind of post-construction inspection? Can you recap on that?
Sure. So yeah, once the project is initially screened to be eligible, then the project will be transitioned to AEA, and we'll have a follow-up phone conversation with the building owner just to discuss property details, what their interests are, what the abilities for them are to do upgrades. We'll be asking for any documentation they have currently, so they have any property needs assessments or historic energy audits, or really anything to help us do a desktop analysis to see what the potential is. And what we'll do is just remotely kind of identify and say, here's the general opportunities at the building. Here's roughly what the percent savings would be to see if they meet that 15% savings threshold or the 25% savings threshold if they want to leverage other major sources of funding. And what the incentive amounts would be, and basically then follow up with the building owner and say, is this something you're willing and able to do? And if the answer is yes, then we proceed to the good faith deposit. So there's a form that the owner would sign, which is called the intent to proceed form, which means just that. And then with that, they would submit their good faith deposit. And then what that would do is it would greenlight AEA to go out and do the full energy audit at the property, refine all those numbers that we did from the desktop analysis. Typically what we find is there's even additional opportunities that weren't even recognized as part of the desktop analysis. So we'll go out, do the energy audit, come back, and then present a final list of all the possible measures at the property, what the percent savings are, and then what the rebate amounts would be based on the greenhouse gas savings for each of those measures. And then the owner basically needs to decide which measures they want to include in their scope of work. And so they would identify, which measures they want to do. And once they do that, they get an incentive reservation form signed. And at that point in time, really, then we would provide the owner with the minimum requirements for all the measures that they want to have installed. And then the owner kind of is in charge from that point, and we're just providing support and assistance. So if the owner has a GC or contractors that they've worked with in the past, they can reach out to them directly and have those contractors provide proposals to the building owner to do that work. But very often, a lot of these properties have procurement requirements that require multiple proposals, or they just want to get multiple proposals, because it's in their best interest. Or maybe doesn't have, and we see this all the time, they don't have any experience working with some of these contractors doing more complex energy efficiency upgrades, and so they would ask the program, do you have any contractors that can do this work? And so in all those instances, we would say, here's the list of currently approved contractors in the program, here's what they can do, here's the regions they serve, and then the owner would reach out to you guys directly to have you provide proposals, and if it's a rather complex project, even have you come to an on-site pre-bid meeting, which we can be on-site for and help support. Then the owner hires the contractor that they select, and then really it's from that point on sort of your typical construction process. So we would want to make sure that A, that your proposal is complete and that you recognize all the requirements for that scope of work, and then B, provide submittals for the various materials, provide a construction schedule, those sort of things, regular check-ins as needed, ultimately just to make sure that the program's on track. Again, we have some real construction deadlines here that dictate how much incentives the owner can get, if they can get any at all. So we really need to make sure that we're all on the same page from day one, so that we're not, driving ourselves crazy here at the end of the program year.
And Nick, actually, you mentioned the making sure kind of what the maximum incentive is. We have a question on that, which is just, is there a maximum incentive that a project can receive?
There is essentially the maximum incentive is the LIWIP rebate plus any other additional rebates the property's getting if they're leveraging other, EUC or other programs. We just need to make sure that the sum of all the rebates isn't greater than the actual project cost. So up front, we'll have what the maximum rebate amount will be, but then at the completion of the project, we're going to have we're going to need to collect documentation on actual costs as well as details of the other rebate programs which participated if it's a 25% scope. And then we just need to make sure that the LIOP incentive isn't going to be such that they got more money than the project actually costs. And if that's happening, we either add more scope to the project or we reduce the LIOP incentive accordingly.
Great. Yep. Okay. So next question, can you just kind of summarize the timeline of the program in terms of when incentives became available? And so there might be a little bit of confusion about if funds are still available, and maybe if you have any kind of expectations about, like, is there any concern that incentives will not be available at some point in the near future? Has there been a lot of interest? Is there still a lot of money available? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, good question. So the program is definitely very open currently. So we're actively bringing in projects as we speak. But the pipeline has a healthy. There's room for projects to come in right now. It is first come, first serve, and the first pool of funds, the higher incentive amounts are for projects that reserve before this December 2016 and complete by the end of April 2017. So we would strongly encourage folks to bring those projects in, but we're not at any risk of having those incentives fill up in the next 60 days. So I definitely encourage you to get in at the beginning of this program year, A, to make sure that you can get started on construction so that you're able to finish by the end of April, which will enable them to get the higher incentive amount, but then B, just to make sure that you get one of the early spots in the overall program pipeline. And then we do have a round 2 of funding for projects that are going to complete after May 1st, 2017. And that particular pool of funding is rather limited currently. So there's definitely more money for the first round of funds. So I definitely encourage people to try to get in through that route. There's more funds and more incentives available. But for whatever reason, if it's just there's no way in hell that it's going to get done by April, then you still have an option for a later finish date. And while we're on this note, you can have a property that sort of falls into both of these pipelines. So if whatever project or whatever measures are able to get done by April, we will pay out at the higher incentive rate. And if some measures are just going to be too complex or just require longer timelines, then that's fine, and they'll get the lower incentive rate for finishing after May. So we can be creative in ways to phase the project and encourage measures to complete as soon as possible.
Great.
I want to elaborate on one thing there, Nick, and let me know if you disagree. But I think what is important, though, if we're phasing projects between the two program funding periods, is that we know that up front. We're not going to have the ability on April 30th to suddenly shift a bunch of projects into the May timeline. So just be aware that that's when we will discuss up front. And don't expect that we'll have a lot of leniency or ability to shift projects because they get delayed. That's one of the reasons why we are going to be very on top of your construction milestones and making sure that you're on track, since this funding is, like many funding sources, extremely limited and time constrained.
Exactly right. At the project reservation, we're going to have agreed upon milestone dates with the building owner, and that's what we're holding them to. That's what the expectations are. And for projects that recognize that they do want to do the phased approach, we're going to have sort of pre-agreed upon phasing milestones. So they say we're going to do the central systems first and the apartment measures second, and all of that's sort of clearly illustrated so that everyone can anticipate when they're going to complete and how much money they're going to get.
Great. So my next the next, I guess it was a few questions, but just general documentation requirements from contractors. Um, so there's, I guess, a few forms we're wondering if they're required from the program. So those forms are performance and payment bonds, uh, prevailing wage documentation, or certified payroll documentation.
So no, there are no prevailing wage or Davis-Bacon requirements right off the bat. So so we don't need to see the prevailing wage requirements. We don't need to see the certified payroll requirements that happen with Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage. There are projects that are going to be coming through that maybe are also getting federal grants or HUD grants, or for whatever reason they're accessing other funds that are triggering prevailing wage, and that sort of and then triggers it throughout the project. But the LIOT program itself is not going to trigger prevailing wage. And so we don't need to see that information in sort of the paperwork that the contractors are providing. Same thing with performance bonds. We don't need to see the performance bonds. I think if the owner is going to be asking for that sort of stuff, then you need to provide the confirmation of that with the building owner themselves. The main things that we need to see are just that you have the appropriate licenses and that you have the minimum insurance requirements. And then that's really the sort of contractor side of the paperwork, and then really it's project-specific paperwork. From that point on, then we need to see, submittals and evidence of permit for measures that need a permit pulled. And then at the completion of the project, we'll need to see what the actual costs were. Typically, that's just in the form of the invoice that was provided to the building owner.
And Nick, can you elaborate on the invoices? So I believe we need to be able to break it down by measure so that we can understand the distinct measure costs. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. So just at the measure, we don't need to break it down too granular, too detailed of a level for a specific measure, but we just need to know, how much was the water heater and how much was the lighting and how much was the roof, so that we know the actual measure cost. So that's definitely going to apply to your GC projects, or projects where the contractor is doing multiple measures. We'll at least need that line item pricing for each of those measures.
Great. Can you address whether there's any requirement to get multiple bids from various contractors, or is that just totally up to the owner?
Totally up to the owner. So because the incentives themselves are paid out on energy savings, on the metric tons of greenhouse gases that are saved, and we're no longer using the SIR method for calculating the incentive amount, the procurement requirements are up to the owner. So if the owner just wants to use one contractor, that's fine. If the owner wants to do multiple bids, either just as a best practice or because they have organizational procurement requirements, then that's really up to the owner to have those requirements.
Great. Another question. So the kind of improvement package or upgrade package that an owner wants to follow, can you just kind of clarify to what extent those need to be completed during a single phase of construction, or if they're able to do kind of one-off upgrades? I know you talked a little bit about phasing. Maybe you can just recap that.
Sure. I mean, we wouldn't do one-off upgrades in the sense of just a handful of apartments. So really sort of categorically at the measure level. So maybe they choose to do windows in the first phase of the project, and then the second phase is attic insulation and refrigerators, and then the third phase is central domestic hot water equipment. So we can phase structures at that level, phase projects at that level. And that phasing structure really needs to be agreed upon up front by all the parties involved on the project, just so that we know we're all on the same page. But we can structure it that way and then pay out after each of those phases are complete.
Great. And does
I have a
go ahead, Sophia.
I have a clarifying question on that one, Nick. What if a project is doing it by building or phasing it by building, or they're phasing it in like chunks of units, for example, because they have to move tenants around? Would we be able to phase it that way as well?
Yep. Yeah, we can be flexible as long as it makes sense. There's some logic to it, but yeah, that's fine. And there's definitely value in projects. If it's a property that has a whole bunch of, say, 10-unit buildings or something, there is value in doing the first building and making sure that all the team members are on the same page and that we get it right in the first building, and then go forth and do it correctly on the remaining ones. So we can structure it in whatever way makes sense for the team.
Great. And we've got a few more minutes left. I think I'll take maybe one or two more questions and then we'll wrap up. So can you address the level of responsibility the owner might have for cost of hazardous material abatement?
Yeah, I mean, if that is a requirement in order to install the energy efficiency measure, if asbestos or lead or whatever other hazardous materials could be involved in that, and then that needs to be fully covered by the owner. There's not, the incentive that we're providing, again, is based on the energy savings. So that if there is any abatement issues, there's not additional grant funding to cover that. So that ultimately those costs would be the responsibility of the building owner. And that sort of discussion needs to happen on day one. So if we're going out and doing a pre-bid meeting, or the owner asks you for a proposal, you should definitely call out that, in addition, say, to installing the central equipment, you're also going to have to abate the asbestos. So, that needs to be identified to make sure that we're all able to go forward and that's not going to sink the project.
Great. And I guess maybe along that lines, so doing combustion safety testing, is that a requirement of the program? And maybe you can just talk a little bit more about the post-construction process of verifying.
Sure, yeah. So
yeah.
On the combustion safety side, AEA will be doing that at the energy audit stage on a sampling basis. And then based on that audit, if we identify any required combustion safety repairs, that'll be included in the scope of work. And in the same way, if we recognize that the agreed upon scope of work is going to trigger combustion safety testing at the end, that'll definitely be flagged up front so that everyone understands what the requirements around that are going to be. And hopefully incorporate it in the scope of work in a way that we all know for sure that at the end of the project, all the combustion safety issues were addressed and there's no issue. But at the completion of the project, AEA will be coming out to verify that the work was completed. For apartment type stuff, we'll probably be verifying on a random sampling basis. We're not going to go into every apartment. But if we recognize that 100% combustion safety is an element of the project, then we will be going out and doing 100% combustion safety testing in all the units. But again, if we know up front what the combustion safety requirements are going to be, then hopefully as a team we've addressed it all, and then really it's just sort of a formality to go out and verify, and we're not going to have any surprises.
Perfect, and we're right at time, so I think we actually addressed everyone's questions, which is great. And thanks so much to everyone for posing so many questions, because that's always a good sign. Hopefully you are interested in the program and that this webinar was valuable for you. I don't know, Sophia, do you wanna wrap us up?
Sure. Thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. As Shannon mentioned, I will follow up with a copy of the presentation. And if you have questions, feel free to email us at any time at the contractor's email on the screen. And we will also begin collecting your documentation as of now. So please submit those as you can, and we will start compiling a list of participating contractors, which we will post to the program website as soon as we have all the documents in. So thanks again for your participation, and we look forward to working with you on projects.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Sophia and
everyone.
Nick, for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a good afternoon.